So Bob emails, let's answer him. What do you say?
I say yes.
Upper tier patron Bukhari from Madison, Wisconsin. He says, do you have any advice on how I can stop being so desperate for others' approval while being completely honest about my past behavior that I can use while I look for a long-term therapist? I am coming to terms with the fact that I have a need for validation and forgiveness from past partners, especially those whose opinion I hold in high regard and whom I view as more sophisticated and educated than I am. Side note, it's kind of an interesting phrase there. I have exhibited behavior, specifically sending...
Wait, I blanked. What was the thing?
He says, I'm coming to terms with the fact I need validation from past partners.
Right.
Especially those whose opinions I hold in high regard and whom I view as more sophisticated and educated than I am.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like to think along those lines of that past partner is more sophisticated than me.
That's a hell of a view of self.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of paradigm. I have exhibited behavior, specifically sending an ex-partner a message and then compelled to send another message after several more months or year, that results in me becoming more desperate when attempts to reach out results in being blocked or ignored by them. So chiming in here, my impression is Bukhari is like reaching out to a former partner and saying something like, hey, can you validate me in this way? Or I'm sorry that I did this. Do you forgive me? And and it could have been years later or months later after the relationship ended or the last time they communicated.
Right.
And he's saying that sometimes it comes across as desperate and that they will block or ignore him.
Oh.
I feel immense shame about this and realize that I have revealed who I am at the core through these actions in spite of all my best intentions. I realize that long-term therapy would help remedy this, but I would appreciate any advice or analysis you could give while I search for a therapist in my area. Bob, what do you think?
I wonder what you're doing when you're reaching out to people after, you've broken up, like weeks or months. You find yourself, it sounds to me like a bid for connection. Because I should just, disclaimer, I don't believe in closure. Anyways, I wonder if it's a bid
Meaning you don't believe in like a complete cutoff and like you never talk again, that kind of thing.
I don't think that we have the conversation that sort of buttons it all up and puts a period at the end of the sentence and on we go. I think that they feel crappy and they feel unfinished. And, I kind of think that that's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
Though speaking of that, I've never seen anybody have a clean breakup where it's like, okay, we break up and we never talk again. People, it's like that's par for the course.
Right.
So, the hell with that.
And the ideal is often what you described, which is the cultural ideal.
Yeah.
And often what is recommended, which I have found I would never recommend to anyone.
Right.
Yeah.
This email reminded me, remember do you remember Swingers?
Yeah, the movie.
Yeah, remember Mike, the main guy, he's like, meets the woman at the bar and then he calls her and he's like, he calls her. And then at the sixth call, he's like, I don't think this is going to work.
Right. So if you haven't seen the movie or you forget it, there's this classic scene where, what's his face from Star Wars and everything?
Jon Favreau.
Jon Favreau, a young Jon Favreau he's like in his 20s and he and this woman broke up or she broke up with him or something. And
No, this is when he met. Oh, sorry.
Did he meet her?
He meets her at a bar.
Oh.
And they trade numbers and then he calls her and he's sort of...
Right. So he goes home and he calls her and he's like, hey, just calling to see how you doing, and he's kind of awkward and he hangs up and then he's sitting there thinking in his lonely apartment. He's like, well, that was a really dumb message. I'll call back. So he calls back again and by the sixth time he's calling, he's just like, yeah, I don't think this is working out. I should probably just say, goodbye and, so...
And she picks up.
Nice knowing you.
Yeah. And she picks up and she says, never call me again.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, makes sense. Hangs up. And so bid for connection and
a view of self as less than, like unsophisticated and somehow
inferior.
Yeah, right. And somehow you're sort of hanging your hat on, your education level compared to theirs. But Anyway, so it seems to me that you might maybe enter into the relationship with a view of self as less than, or as Kirk said, inferior. And, like, I wonder what impact what role that plays in the way the relationship unfolds, and what you call a need for validation. By the way, a grain of salt on that one. I mean, I don't really know your situation, but we all need validation. Mm-hmm. We just do. And so I don't know that your need is any different than mine or Kirk's or anybody else's. So maybe it is. I mean, I don't want to presume anything. Does this have, like, does this smell? Does it strike you as maybe having a dependent quality to it?
Yeah, at the very least, a schema of I am bad.
Yeah.
I am deficient.
Right.
I am not good enough.
Right.
And that can be at the basis of dependent. It can also be the basis of avoidant.
Avoidant, yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah,
and dependency in that I need someone to tell me who I am,
right,
and validate me. It's hard for me to validate myself.
But now, you help me if I've got this wrong. The paradox of that is the person often resents the person that they're relying on for validation. And
yeah,
I don't know. It just went through my head. Like, I wonder if somewhere inside this person feels that way. And maybe, we don't know. We don't know. So anyways, the first thought that came to my head was, I wonder if it would make sense to put off the call that you find yourself wanting to make and give yourself a shot at examining the energy that drives you, and learn about that part of yourself.
Yeah.
Because my guess is somebody's, that scene in The Wizard of Oz where the wizard's behind the curtain, and the wizard is this guy, and he's pulling all the strings and the smoke and the fire and the whole thing, right? And he's the wizard, and he's just this kind of vulnerable guy. I think everybody has that inside them, someone behind a curtain. I suspect. I think there's probably someone behind a curtain here, and who's got legitimate need, and just is trying their best to get it met in this particular way. And what you're discovering is it's self-defeating in its outcome, not in its intention.
Right.
And you're not happy about it.
Yeah.
And I'm pro go find a therapist and
Yeah.
get a chance to work on some of this.
Yeah.
learning.
The only thing I'll add to this is, Bukhari, is I would focus your bids for acceptance and connection in directions where you're actually going to get your needs met.
Oh yeah.
A therapist would be good, but hopefully you have other people in your life.
Right.
Because if I really thought about it, and Bob, tell me what you think.
Okay.
I could really have a huge catalog, an Excel spreadsheet, if you will, of regrets regarding past partners or past relationships. If I really just sat with, oh my God, I remember when that happened. Oh my God, I wonder if this person thinks this of me. And those intrusive thoughts will happen sometimes. There's this one, I won't share because I don't feel like it, but there's this one thought that I every once in a while just pops into my head, and I get that cringe feeling, like, I can't believe I said that.
Yeah.
And this was from, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. And I suppose I could reach out to her. I'm friends with her, and say, she's not a past partner. She's a friend of mine, but every once in a while I just think about, anyway, I could reach out and say, and sometimes I do, sometimes I will. But I think perhaps more, if it's an ongoing thing, Bukhari, is to think, which it probably is for you, is like, for me, it would be, I might tell Bob about it and be like, what do you think about, here's the story of what I did that I cringe about.
Right.
What do you think about it?
Sure.
And, I know I trust Bob. If I told Stacy, I would trust her to not especially give me the extreme negative reaction that I worry that I would get. Maybe someone would be like, yeesh, that sounds pretty bad, but I still like you.
Yeah.
I don't reject you. Because that's always the thing for us, Bukhari, is people can think bad things about us. People can judge us. People can criticize us. But if they love us and accept us and hold on to us and don't reject us, then we're probably good. Yeah. So it's not, do you approve of this behavior? It's, do I have a secure relationship on this planet? And so for you, Bukhari, hopefully you can get that. So yes, long-term therapy, as you said, is the remedy, and there's a whole slew of things, and I'm guessing it's a repetition in a secure relationship with a therapist or someone else of, am I good enough? Do you accept me as I am, in all my flaws?
Yeah.
Do you accept me and love me and won't reject me? And through that experience, I'm guessing the urge to reach out to past partners and creeping them out will diminish.
Yeah.
Anonymous listener says, what is your opinion about the Harvard lawsuit and shared therapist notes? Let me explain. This week, 3 graduate students at Harvard filed a lawsuit against the university for mishandling of repeated and longstanding incidents of sexual harassment perpetrated by one of its prominent faculty members.
Whoa.
The lawsuit states that as part of Harvard's investigation, the university obtained the therapy notes of one of the students from her non-Harvard affiliated therapist and shared them with the accused, I'm guessing in court or between the lawyers.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this, Bob? What do you think?
Did they have permission to do that?
So I don't know. I only briefly looked into it, but in terms of permission from the therapist?
No, from the...
No permission from the client.
So the therapist gave up their notes without permission from the client to basically the other side.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. How do they sleep at night?
And not only the other side, but also someone who had sexually harassed.
Oh, no.
Her. So I think so. There's a
right.
A faculty member has sexually harassed a student. The student happened to be in therapy outside the university, and somehow that therapist handed over the file to the accused professor's legal team.
It's hard to understand how a person could come to that thought that were okay.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a scenario under which...
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, okay.
I don't know,
okay.
But obviously... So there's a few scenarios that I'll talk about, and I didn't really want to look into this. And I looked into it briefly, and I just couldn't find any information to give me anything to go off of. But I'll just tell you what I could imagine happening.
All right.
Worst case scenario, Vil, is the therapist literally doesn't know what ethical or legal codes are and just handed over the notes because they got a subpoena. So there are different, and I'm not a legal expert, but I'm 95. And whenever I do deal with these kinds of realities, even with a supervisee, I actually reach out to my lawyer, Frances Shopick, and actually ask her specifically, because she either knows the answer immediately or she knows how to find the exact legal answer.
Right.
But so just speaking from experience along those lines, and people out there, don't use this advice. My lawyer would tell me, for me to tell you, do not follow this advice as legal counsel.
Right.
You always want to find your own legal counsel.
Yes.
I cannot stress, because it's pretty rare that us as therapists are faced with legal issues that require legal counsel.
Yeah.
So it's well worth spending the $500
it's
or
totally
whatever
worth it
to get actual, and your professional organizations, like I'm a part of Marriage and Family Therapy.
Hey, me too.
Has a free. Oh, you're a member too.
Yeah.
Right. Has a free. Did you know we have a free lawyer available to us?
I did not know that.
Yeah. That specializes in marriage and family therapy, legal issues anyway,
Right on.
and ethical issues anyway, and she'll call you back. I don't think a lot of people call her anyway, which is kind of weird. Well, it was a her 3 years ago, but anyway. So what I'll say is that sometimes a lawyer will subpoena a therapist's. So the motivation often for, I don't know, but often, for the professor that's being accused of sexual harassment, the lawyers and the professor are thinking, well, if we can discredit the accuser, then we'll go up, we'll be, what do you say, acquitted or whatever.
Right.
And one of the ways they think you can do that is if we can get the notes from her therapists that say that she's lied before, or that she has some diagnosis that could be associated with
Yeah.
reactivity or
Some way
delusion.
to-
Yeah, I mean, if she was literally schizophrenic and had a delusion that her professor had sex with her, then, that'd be an extreme example.
sure.
But it probably wasn't in that direction. It's probably just like trauma or something that was being displaced, as be the theory. Anyway, so...
That's the theory a lawyer might push. You're not saying that's what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the lawyer will subpoena officially the therapist. They'll send a subpoena to the therapist saying, hand over the file. And
What does that word mean, subpoena?
what does it mean? I don't know.
P-O-E-N-A.
It's Latin, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But how does that differ from a request for records from, say,
That's all it is. That's all it is. So, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and
Yeah.
I'm only 60% sure of this, but I think the word for request is subpoena in the legal world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when a lawyer, but we have this association with subpoena as having this obligation.
Yeah, authority.
Yeah. But when a lawyer sends you a subpoena, you do not have to, you're not obligated to necessarily to oblige as a therapist handing over your notes.
Yes.
You might be under some circumstances, though. That's why you always want to consult with a lawyer.
Talk to a lawyer.
Also, I remember being told that you don't even have to respond to the lawyer, but that's not true. You should respond. You can say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. That's all you have to say. Again, you would always want to talk with your lawyer.
Yes.
Now, if a judge from the bench issues a subpoena, then my understanding is majority of the time you are obligated.
Right.
So
you should still talk to a lawyer.
right. So an expert on this issue,
Right.
And preemptively, all your therapy notes should be buttoned up, and your treatment plan and your assessments. So, because I don't know the stats, but anecdotally, 75% of the time, people's notes are insufficient. Like it's, anyway. So, I maybe the accused lawyer subpoenaed the therapist, somehow found out she was in therapy, which is, how would they know? But anyway, and then the therapist might have mistaken that as an obligation and handed over their notes.
Okay,
So that's one scenario.
So just mistake of ignorance and not sort of finding some help when they
Right.
needed to.
Right. Another scenario is that the therapist might have determined that it was actually in the best interest of all those involved. For example, if the therapist actually thought that the student was committing a crime, the client was committing a crime by falsely accusing, that would be a very strange conclusion for a therapist to come to.
It would.
And it's an extreme action to take, but I could see there is wiggle room in the ethics around that kind of thing, where you can say for the greater good, and there's some precedent around that. That's why whenever you learn about ethics and law, never trust someone that says it's always this way.
Yeah, right.
Because the more I look into it, the more it's like there's always exceptions, because this is a thing of humans. It's not like these laws are decided by God. It's humans that are writing them and deciding on them.
That's what we decide is the right thing to do.
Right. So you can have a judge that just interprets the law or the ethics a little differently, or a jury that interprets it a little differently, and it's completely not the way you're being taught. So there's always these kinds of caveats, which, really gives us a lot of anxiety, because it's like, well, what am I supposed to do?
But you don't have to know the answer. If
Right.
you talk to a legal expert and document that you did, if they give you bad advice, you're reasonably safe.
Right, exactly. Or an expert. You can talk with a lawyer and or someone who is reasonably considered an expert on these things.
Right.
Another therapist, for example, supervisor, that kind of thing.
Most are not. Is
Right.
that true?
Yeah, most therapists are not qualified, in my book, to provide competent advice. But it depends on what it is. If it was a
I'm not.
Tarasoff issue, I would imagine most therapists would be able or I don't know, 30% of therapists would be able to adequately advise.
What's a Tarasov issue for those of us who?
Oh, when we as a therapist obtain information through our work with clients that someone is in danger of being seriously harmed or killed, we have it's considered that we have a obligation to do what we can within reason to inform and or protect that individual from harm, even if it means breaking confidentiality.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, and in Washington State, we actually have an even higher, more broad obligation, which is the Peterson case, which I won't go into. You can listen to my deep dives on that. But that's another possibility. The other possibility, obviously, the therapist just has no idea what they're doing, and they just handed over their stuff. Another possibility is that they were threatened somehow, the therapist.
And in which case, they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
They're acting out of fear and...
Right.
Yeah. Oh, how awful.
Yeah. I mean, the only situation where I can imagine it being okay or reasonable is if the therapist was like, well, I don't have to hand this over, but I think it's in the best interest of even my client that I do. That, you know, there's a very low likelihood of that being true, but, you know, there are situations where that's true. I can't imagine what that would be, but again, from the article, it was really hard to get detailed information.
Yeah.
So
the most obvious conclusion is the therapist messed up.
Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me. Does it surprise you that a therapist would do something like that? Yeah.
No.
It's really, you know, in our field, we are so isolated. Even if you're working at an organization,
yeah,
you know, when you're working at McDonald's, you're never isolated. There's always 3 employees that are right there. Mm-hmm. As a therapist, we're 99% of the time behind closed doors doing God knows what.
Right. Well,
and so we end up, I think, as therapists, getting lulled into a sense of not asking for help and not having someone there to sort of be like, so this happened to me. I mean, sometimes therapists are neglected and not provided with guidance, you know, especially in today's world with increased productivity being foisted on therapists and with operating at home, or the supervisor operating at home. You know, one of the things that would really upset me about some of the interns that I would supervise, you know, because I'm supervising them at the university, but they're at a site that I'm not in control of.
Some clinic somewhere.
And I would have a wide range of reports. You know, some of my interns would tell me that at any time they could walk out their office and find a superior, a colleague a more experienced colleague, or their supervisor, and ask them a direct question like, what do I do with this? And then on the other end of the spectrum, I would have interns that would say that they're on their own 99% of the time and have no way of contacting anyone, or no one responds, and this sort of thing. And 5 years in, sure, but like week 1 of your internship,
oh, that's too much.
Yeah. And the way that interns are treated, they don't feel like they have the right to complain about that. They're just like, well, I do what I'm told.
We don't know the experience level of this particular therapist, do we?
Right. Anyway, so pretty awful, and another potential indictment on our training and supervision and oversight.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Get back. More emails. What do you say, Bob?
Yup.
Hey, deserving listeners. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. When you sign up, use the code Seattle16. HelloFresh sends you easy-to-make meal kits delivered right to your door every week. Ingredients travel from farm to your doorstep in under a week, so they're always fresh, all without having to leave your house, which appeals to me because I hate running errands. Puts me in a bad mood, to be honest. HelloFresh is super flexible. You can skip weeks when you need to. You can pick your favorites from 50 different weekly options. In our house, we love all the recipes, but some of them that are really great are the citrus beef tacos, their barbecue sloppy joes, and their pizzas. you know, me and my pizzas. So go to HelloFresh.com/Seattle16, that's Seattle16, and use the code Seattle16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/Seattle16 and use the code Seattle16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. And remember that HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP, an old patron praise.
Ooh, where are we at?
We're at March of 2020. We have
Right
Lisa Marie from Kennewick, Washington. You ever been to Kennewick?
Yes.
We have a friend of mine, Sin, a friend of mine of many years who I email with occasionally.
Do I know Sin?
No. It's just, I find it heartwarming, and I feel slightly guilty when a friend of mine is a patron of the podcast.
I'm a patron.
I know. The same.
Yeah.
Mackenzie from Calgary, Alberta.
Oh.
We got David, Brian, Kay, and Aaron from God knows where. We got Julia from Santa Cruz, California. John from Waterford, Ireland. Sarah from Chicago, Illinois. And Susan from Oceanside, California.
Wow.
I feel like I've communicated with Susan.
Were those 4 people one patron?
No, they're
just from
They
God
just
knows
don't
where.
list their address publicly
Understood.
on Patreon, which is fine. By the way, if you're an upper tier patron and you want swag and you don't share your address with us, we can't send you something. And it frustrates my wife, Stacy, when she's trying to send you swag because she feels guilty because she wants to give you the swag. But you don't have to take the swag. You don't have to give your address to Patreon. We don't share your address with anyone. And whenever I do these OPPs, I always just name the city. I don't name your address.
No,
obviously.
nobody's street address or
Yeah.
email has been given out.
Yeah. I even though I have access to many of the patrons' addresses, I would never, ever share that with anyone. I mean, my God. Or I don't share your email with anyone. And you also notice that I only say your first name because I don't know if people are sensitive about that kind of thing.
Right.
So anyway, so let's go on to another email. Bob.
Yes.
Let's commit to lightning round. I did this with Rebecca recently.
Yeah.
And we actually got through maybe 5 times as many emails as we did normally because
Lightning round.
there's a lot of them here.
Okay.
So this is mainly reminding me to be lightning, not so
If I
much
go,
you. Yeah.
That means
Well, so it's funny because Rebecca had a phrase. I think she just literally said lightning round every once in a while. Listener Taylor, she says, I'm an associate marriage and family therapist in California who is undergoing training in psychedelic therapy.
Oh, interesting.
Our community has found out about some recent ethical misconduct by some of the leaders in the field. The people in question are leaders in the field, which has been quite shattering to many of us trainees. I think she sent me a article that I think had allegations of sexual misconduct on
While
behalf.
somebody was being guided.
I don't know if it was clients or colleagues,
Yeah.
subordinates in the psychedelic therapy.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. But
Sure, right.
some sort of allegation. Me and my colleagues and myself are passionate about continuing to do ethical psychedelic psychotherapy.
Right on.
But with the field being so new, we worry about doing harm. What are your thoughts on this, Bob? What do you think?
I love that you're worried about doing harm. Sounds like you're going to be okay. I think it's really interesting. And is the jury out on psychedelic?
So, yeah, because I actually had a researcher on the show, on the podcast. I interviewed her a year or 2 ago, and her, she's an expert. She's conducting the protocol. Right. Knows all that. She's a clinician herself. She knows all the research, and what she would say is that there are promising preliminary results. Right on. That psychedelics, psilocybin, other kinds of psychedelics, may help with some people dealing with treatment-resistant depression, with death and dying, coping and acceptance.
With their own passing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the meaning of one's life to some extent.
Wow.
With there's a couple other things, but mainly what they're focusing on is that, I believe, is treatment-resistant depression, addiction as well. And what we can say is that it's worthy of more robust ongoing research.
Yeah.
What we can't say is that it's actually recommended that people engage in this kind of treatment. Because, there are some significant side effects.
Yeah.
One just being it takes a long time because you will take the psilocybin. You're guided by 2 therapists. It would be expensive. 4 hours. You're sitting there on a couch while 2 therapists walk you through it. And the protocol involves a number of sessions like this.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
And there can be obviously bad trips that can happen.
Right.
The person I interviewed assured me that doesn't happen very often because they know how to mitigate that.
Right.
But, there's that.
Well, then I think it's good.
Yeah.
There's an ethical way to do it. We're learning about it, but everything had to be started by learning about it, and it was all experimental at some point, right? The first appendectomy, that was a guess.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and the reason why it's brand new is because it recently became less stigmatized and less criminal, and thus open to more sort of less stigma, activity, less stigmatized activity in terms of research, but also more funding from government and whatnot. But
where are we at? Is last I heard, Oregon was the only place in the U.S. that permitted it. Is that?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Seems like California would be have a population that were willing to support it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
What I'll also say, and I've always said this for years now, is that the claims online that you'll hear about psychedelic therapy are overblown. Often they will say, there'll be a headline that says dropping acid cures your depression, and
something weird and
just way ahead of the science at this point, because it's a clickable title.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that are taking drugs that just want propaganda that sort of props up their use.
Sure.
And because to me, whenever I hear people kind of freaking out about psychedelic therapy, I'm like, well, yeah, great, let's research it, and it could work, but it's like any other psychotropic. It's not really that different from any other psychotropic, or it's in terms of the category of could it work or would it not, or even some of the function, regarding serotonin and dopamine and stuff. We have drugs that are also sometimes effective that involve those, systems in the brain. So it's not like we're that far afield from.
Sure. This is not a complete shot in the dark. We've got some data here.
Yeah, we're not on an alien planet. It's just it's an adjacent drug that we've neglected to research over the past 50 years because it was illegal and it wouldn't get funded. So, let's research it. And I suspect, and I've been saying this from the beginning, that 40 years from now, once we have more data behind us, we will find that it is an option available that sometimes works. But I'm guessing most people, they either won't need it, or it'll be too much of a bother, or there will be another alternative that will be less involved that will also potentially help with treatment-resistant things. But there will be a minority of people, I think, that it'll be life-changing, as some people will already attest to. Yeah.
Right.
And the protocol is not just microdosing on psychedelics on your own. It's if you pay attention to the protocol, it's pretty well. Anyway, lightning round. Anonymous up to your patron, she says, what kinds of things could be behind someone's anxiety and guilt when interacting with underage sexual abuse survivors? What kinds of things could be behind someone's anxiety and guilt when interacting with underage sexual abuse survivors? In my work, I'm obligated by law to inform authorities if an underage person tells me that they have been a victim of sexual assault or abuse. I feel anxious with the protocol, even when they are somewhat So I don't think this person is a therapist.
Okay, got it.
So they could be a teacher.
Yeah.
I feel anxious with the protocol, even when they are somewhat agreeable, maybe a social worker, when they are somewhat agreeable and know they are going to be offered support and possibly even justice. I try my best to communicate some important things like that they were hurt, it's not their fault, and that they can that they can and deserve to heal.
Yeah.
However, during these interactions, I feel not good enough, and I feel quite vulnerable, although I myself haven't been abused or even been an abuser. I fear they pick up my anxiety about the protocol, which I believe could reinforce stigma around these themes. I feel as if I was given a baby and then I just dropped the baby. I know experience, supervision, etc. will help, but my fear of failure and uneasiness when supporting survivors unsettles me. What should I do? Bob, what do you think?
Well, you're in a weird spot because you're telling us you're obligated to respond in a certain way. So whether the person who shares that information with you wants you to or not, you're stuck. I would feel anxious and guilty too, particularly if they didn't want me to do it or if I didn't know if they would think it were a good idea. So, I mean, what a crap seat to sit in.
Yeah.
That just sucks.
Yeah. Well, we sit in that seat. Did you know that?
Well, yeah. The reason I'm thinking about it this way, though, is because it sounds like this person.
Well, you don't work with kids,
I do not.
So I guess the blank look on your face was that thing. But like, I have worked with kids and supervised people. So for us, it's like it's a frequently discussed and bumped up against.
Oh, right.
obligation.
Yeah. No, this is outside my general experience.
Right. I guess I hadn't really
working with grown-ups. And,
I hadn't really thought about that.
Right.
That for you, calling CPS, Child Protective
I think
Services.
I've done it once or twice, and that was particularly at the beginning of my career.
Right.
And then none since.
It's just not really a concern
It's
for you.
not really a thing. So me being savvy with all this stuff. But I'm just imagining being forced marched into having to, that would suck.
Do you remember the circumstances around why you had to call?
No.
Yeah.
30 years ago. Ugh.
Yeah. So, anonymous Hypertier patron, you're right. That experience supervision will help.
Yeah.
And, or a therapist, maybe. I don't know what sort of job you have, but if you're a teacher, going to the vice principal who might be your boss, I don't know if they necessarily would help. Going to a therapist that really understands, because
what about going to CPS itself and asking the generic question, how do I support a kid in this circumstance?
Yeah.
Would they know?
Yeah, well, with CPS, it's a crapshoot in my experience.
Okay.
Some CPS workers are some of the wisest, most compassionate, intelligent people I've ever met.
Right on.
And some CPS workers seems like they just picked them off the street and they don't even understand anything about anything.
Mm.
So it depends is the thing.
Okay.
I would, if a therapist came to me and said, what you're saying, and I'm a separate, I would sit and I had the time and you were a colleague or whatever, I would sit down with you and we would really, when I supervise people, so I'll say this, when I have new therapists that bump up against this, even though they have all the expertise and they have even a venue to talk about this with their clients, it's expected, which it doesn't sound like it's for you. It's still very nerve-wracking and scary. But there are some principles that I try to bestow, and I don't know if this will help. But one is that your clients aren't as fragile as you think they are.
Oh, right on.
So when your client or a person is telling you about what they've been through, all the glass that would break has already broken. Mm-hmm. That you and your reaction, you're not, even if you kind of royally screw it up, compared to what they've been through, you're probably, even when you screw it up, one of the best interactions they've ever had around this sort of thing. Because the fact that they could just say it and you don't reject them or deny or call them a liar or beat them is an improvement probably. So that's one principle that I often have to give to, because it kind of sounds like you're feeling that way. It's like I've been given a baby and then I just drop it.
Right.
People are stronger than that. And if you make a mistake, there's also potential place for recovery of like, oh, I'm sorry, I was awkward about that. So that's one. Two is like you're saying, experience, just getting really comfortable talking about it. I find that for some people, and maybe everyone, there are certain topics, they're super taboo in our society, and thus when we're faced with having to talk about it, we clam up or become paralyzed by society's messages in our mind telling us that we shouldn't be talking about it. And so you just got to get your hands dirty and just have to get comfortable talking about it. Maybe not with your the people you're helping, but maybe with others, just
Yeah.
that language.
Colleagues.
Yeah. And this really applies to a lot of areas, whether you're talking about sexual abuse or racism or sexism or fantasies of a kinky nature or something. Like it the first few times you're talking about it, it can be paralyzing because you're not supposed to talk about it. But the more you talk about it, the more it just you'll feel it a little bit, the taboo, but you'll push past it real quick. So I don't know if there's that. The other thing is to enter the experience of the person you're talking to. You have a job to do, so do that. But also half of your attention should be just asking the person how they feel about it. Just like, so here's what we're going to do. How do you feel about that? Just check in. I'm guessing that would ease you because they would probably say, well, okay, let's continue.
Right.
The last thing I'll say, because lightning round is some of these situations are you're in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
So if, like you say, you're obligated by law to inform authorities, if you don't have a therapeutic relationship with these people, like they're a student or they're just someone that passes through your office, you are screwed in terms of like trying to have a conclusion that feels satisfying to you.
Right. Yeah.
And you say, anonymous up to your patron, that you believe in the protocol because often these people can get support afterwards and even justice.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, that's not always the case. And sometimes the system will completely fail these victims, but you still have to follow the protocol.
Yeah, because
it's the law.
This is what we say is the right thing to do.
Right. And I'm guessing you don't have any control over the outcome. So it's a no-win situation sometimes.
Right.
And to go into it with the hope or the feeling like, well, are other people always feeling wonderful about this is probably misguided. There's a chance that 9 times out of 10, you are being set up for failure in that the person in question will resent you or will be extremely uncomfortable and or will be failed by the system after you follow your obligation.
The point being that outcome doesn't mean you did a bad thing or a bad job.
Right. So sometimes you just have to accept, like, oh, here I am. And I've been that. I've been in those shoes where I'm like, I have to do a job right now, and I have no idea if this is actually a good thing for this person or not, but they disclose something to me, and I have to move forward. And so what
Lightning round.
Huh?
Lightning round.
Yeah, sorry. Up to your patient Samantha says, in hearing your various podcast episodes, I've noticed that you often praise differentiation, but you also have said that you're not a huge fan of mindfulness. I kind of thought these two things were similar, mind of mind kind of thing. So what is the difference in your opinion? Well, first off, what I'll say in response to this is, if I've ever given the impression that I'm not a huge fan of mindfulness, I have misspoke or been stupid, which is completely possible.
What's with you and mindfulness, Kirk?
Or when I talk about mindfulness as not a universal, wonderful thing, the way that acolytes will talk about it as, some people interpret it as me not being a fan of mindfulness or saying that it's not good.
Yeah.
So let's live in the gray zone, people, that my position on mindfulness is that it's, of course, wonderful because it works for many, many people.
Sure.
And at the very least, it's a good thing to do for relaxation, which we can all use in our society. And for some people, it's a life changer. So not only with relaxation or blood pressure or anxiety, depression. Psoriasis even.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. All sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And it can be a spiritual revelation for some people. Sure. If they meditate and whatnot.
Yeah, great.
It can be a huge component in borderline treatment, as you know, Bob.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm a fan of it, and of course, I support it, and I've done it. And I've recommended it at times. I'm not a huge. It's not a frequent thing that I pull out, but I will. when it seems like it's really a must that a client will do.
This reminds me of grad school when people would say, hey, have you read this book? Hey, have you read this book? And
Yeah.
you just want to strangle them. Like, no, I didn't read your dumb book.
Yeah.
But so you're saying mindfulness is not a panacea, everybody.
Right.
Come on.
Right. The way that some will refer to it as.
Yeah.
I mean, there are literally some therapists, and I'll hear this from listeners to the podcast, that the therapist, literally 90% of the time, that's all that they're recommending. You know, someone comes in talking about childhood abuse, and they're like, well, have you heard of mindfulness? And it's like,
that's depressing.
yeah, people can learn about mindfulness on YouTube. Like,
Sure.
if that's all you're good at, like, just quit and become a YouTube person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, therapy has so much more potential than just providing that guidance. But now, if mindfulness works for you as a therapist and you recommend it a lot when it's actually helpful and you're not denying someone's experience, or you highly disclose that prior to engaging in a therapeutic relationship, that your whole bent is mindfulness so that a client can make a choice about that, then, fine. The other thing that I will say that I'm not a fan of is that some people who are avoidant, attachment-wise, and like to intellectualize and deny their own feelings, when they bump up against valid anger and pain and fear, they will stigmatize themselves, because our society, particularly men, and will listen to society about toxic masculinity and whatnot, and will turn to mindfulness as a tool, a bludgeon, a hammer, a bludgeon tool against their a cudgel. That's me, as a cudgel against that they can use to suppress their emotions. Mindfulness is fine, but if you have emotions, you can't solve that through mindfulness.
I think lots of us have a misconception of what the hell that means. They think you're going to clear my mind and float on a fluffy cloud like a Buddha or something. No. Be gone floating on a fluffy cloud. Be gone clearing your head. If my head could clear, boy, that would have been great. But it doesn't.
Right.
So mindfulness, at least as I understand it, is not about transcending the moment and trying to, so whatever. Anyways, what are they talking about with this differentiation thing?
So thanks for getting me back on track.
Sure.
In, I don't know, pop psych circles and even some literature, not serious literature, but like Psychology Today or something, which
funny.
There's a lot of really questionable articles on Psychology Today, but
Indeed.
They will associate differentiation with mindfulness. And there's a lot of research that looks at those two things for sure. Like giving a mindfulness protocol will increase differentiation. And so they are similar. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because a component of differentiation, or an outcome, an effect, is that you have the ability to reflect on your own reactivity and make quote unquote mindful choices.
Sure.
Or volitional choices, goal-oriented choices, healthy choices about how to proceed. For example, in BPD treatment in DBT, mindfulness is a huge component, right?
Yes.
How is it a component in DBT?
For those things, it's the possibility of stepping back from a moment and deciding for oneself, or seeing for oneself what is actually happening, and choosing a path that is in line with one's wisdom or goals.
Yeah. But that's a particular sliver of mindfulness, right? Like, not all, under the umbrella of quote unquote mindfulness, not everyone that is doing that, right? For some people, it's just making your mind blank, right?
Yeah, some people push that blank mind thing. That's not what they do in DBT land,
Right.
and it's not what I would ever try to... I think that's a setup to make people feel like crap about themselves, because the mind doesn't blank.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, if for you or anyone else, the mind blank mindfulness practice has positive outcomes of spiritual awakening or relaxation, quieting the mind, if you will, control over your thoughts, letting go. Anyway, point is that there is I've heard a lot of people that will talk about that, and find success in that.
Clearly, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. So at the very least, for the people that you're talking with, right, that when they do try to do that type. So is that what you're saying, when in DBT land, when the people who suffer from borderline or ongoing suicidality will try to do the mind blank mindfulness, they will fail, so to speak, and judge themselves for not being good at mindfulness.
Yeah, if they had that misapprehension about what's supposed to happen, at least as far as DBT people say, then yeah, they would feel pretty frustrated.
And instead, you promote the idea of separating your attention mechanism from your emotion and looking at your emotion.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Instead of being drowning in your own
Right.
emotion, you separate the observing eye from the emotion and you look at yourself and the feeling you're having.
Surf the emotions, surf the thought patterns, whatever.
So you can not operate as if the emotion is informing reality
Right.
or what you're supposed to do next. For example, with borderline, you are at work and someone looks at you funny and you feel betrayed and rejected and angry and hurt and enraged perhaps, or wanting to go to the bathroom and cut or something. And with that version of mindfulness, you look at that and you go, okay, what am I, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, that thing happened. I don't know if it's appropriate or not, or healthy or not, but at least I can look. Step one is look at the self.
So I'm not a slave to my impulse. Yeah.
And I can only de-slave myself if I at least separate part of my consciousness from that and look at it.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm just drowning in it and am a slave to that impulse. Right. So differentiation is very much that. I mean, it's framed more broadly in terms of having your intellect and your feelings separate and differentiated so that you can look at either as a guide for what you're supposed to feel and do.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. So there's that. But differentiation is so much broader than that because it involves relationships. You know, mindfulness has nothing to do with your relationship with your parents.
No.
Differentiation has everything to do with development and family and systems and triangulation and emotional fusion and the emotional state of a group of people, you know, undifferentiated family ego mass, this kind of stuff. So differentiation is and even more broadly, Bowen would say that differentiation is not just that, but it's also because, you know, originally Bowen talked, lightning round, but what he was talking about was one of the components, and I think this is often overlooked, is that at the basis of all living systems, there's a constant, maybe even natural systems like non-living systems, but at least living systems, there's a constant tension and drive to come together and to individuate. So even within cellular systems, he would draw this connection. But the way it relates to humans is that we are constantly trying to gain intimacy and closeness and understanding and overlap with other people. And at the same time, we're constantly trying to be our own person and have the freedom to act alone and to think alone. And in that tension is the paradox, the intimacy paradox, as Donald Williamson put it, that we have to navigate and we have to figure out the healthy balance and flexibility between those two. And that's differentiation. Of course, mindfulness has nothing to do with that sort of thing. So,
right on.
Up at your patron, Rebecca from Ohio says, in relationships outside my family, I cannot seem to get my point across without worrying about being mean. I have heard that bipolars like myself can get nasty. I work very hard on not losing my temper with anyone to the point where I don't say anything. So Rebecca's saying, in relationships outside my family, I cannot seem to seem to be assertive with other people verbally without worrying that I'm being too hostile. Bob, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to presume that Rebecca's a woman operating in a world where there's misogyny and sexism, and women are expected to behave passively and docilely and subvert to men. And so Colleen has told me many times about how, it just pissed me off, how she is forced to eat shit because some man who happens to be her boss is like, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so it's possible that it's not a problem of being mean, but perhaps a problem of being perceived as such if you assert yourself as a woman the way, men get actually supported, praised, some word like that.
Yeah.
They're allowed to do it.
Allowed.
Yeah,
Right.
They're allowed to do it. So maybe there's an element of that in there. Now I'm going to pass to Kirk so I can think some more.
Okay, good.
Lightning round.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know because you might actually be occasionally hostile and thus should be careful about that. But I'm not hearing that in what you're saying. You're saying that as a person with bipolar, you know that sometimes people with bipolar can overreact or be hostile. I mean, I guess what I would watch out for is what mood you're in, because that's going to affect your disposition and your filter and your gauge of what is fair to other people. And this is true for anyone, whether you have bipolar or not. If you're in a bad mood, things are going to feel more justified when they're not. So I would have that as a factor, because if you're in a bad mood or you're manic or something or depressed, that would mean you should pay particular attention to your interpretations and your behavior. Whereas if you're not in one of those poles, then you perhaps wouldn't have to grip so tightly to the steering wheel.
Right. Oh,
but
I like that image.
In terms of sexism, obviously, that would be something to think about, as Bob was saying.
Humility is a good idea, don't you think? Like, let's say I do behave in a hostile or mean way. I certainly have done that. Saying I'm sorry is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, and I think more broadly, and this is my style, is lots of caveats. You know, like when I am faced with a situation like this, and I don't know someone well enough to be able to gauge their reaction or something, you know, I might have a lot of caveats of just like, so I'm about to say something and I hope it doesn't come across as mean.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, just something like that. So, because I find that a lot of people don't do that. And I'm always thinking so much could be facilitated by providing that context.
Yeah.
Of like...
fallibility.
Well, intention is also, you know, like I'm about to say something, it might come across as mean, but I don't mean it that way. And if it does, that's on me. I'm sorry. You know,
Sure.
it doesn't take long to say that, but for some reason, almost no one ever says stuff like that. And it's more relevant in romantic relationships, close relationships, because so many times there's things like this that will happen. Like how often are we called upon or motivated to tell our spouse to do something different around the house? You know what I mean? Like, I don't like it when you, put the cups in the cupboard that way or something, you know, I don't like it when you stuff the garbage can like way beyond its capacity without taking it out. And strangely, but I think it's relatable, we have a hard time asking our partners about stuff like that, right?
Sure.
It strangely would be easier to tell an employee or someone at work to do something than it would be to tell our partners to do something. So I'm always a fan, and, you know, I think it works some of the time to caveat it. Like for me, what I do, because people are...
Lightning round.
Okay. Because people will take it hard, right? So what I do is I say, so on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being, this is a total deal breaker for me, and 1 being like, I really don't care, this is a 2. So I'm prepping you that I don't really care.
Yeah.
You could literally not oblige me on this request, and I will live. It'll be fine. But I would just want to point out that when you do this and that, it'd be nice if you did that. So, you know, that could help to mitigate any misunderstanding of coming across as mean.
Oil the gears.
Yeah. Anonymous Annual Upper-Tier Patron from Arizona. She says, I am a 35-year-old female and recently ended a long-term therapeutic relationship with a male EMDR therapist after an extremely painful rupture. So you get all that detail?
I did.
So long-term relationship, EMDR, painful rupture. I didn't know this before therapy, but I learned that I have a lot of attachment issues with males.
Yeah.
I trace it back to having an emotionally neglectful and absent father, possible early childhood sexual abuse, and long-standing sexual starvation. With what I know now, it was probably inevitable that I was going to form all kinds of wild transference and attachment to this male therapist. And I certainly did, and probably will again if I ever have another male therapist. Now, as I look for a new therapist, I wonder, is it better for me to work with a female therapist since I don't have weird attachment and transference issues with other females? And there will be no distractions? Or is it better for me to work with another gentle, patient, understanding male therapist because it will probably force me to face these issues head on and offer more corrective experiences? Improving my ability to trust and feel safe around men is my number one priority in therapy at the moment. Is it ever fair for someone to select a new therapist based on sex? What should I do? Bob, first off, just before you respond, Bob.
Sure.
Either this person listens to this podcast a lot and is extremely, either way, they're very wise and intelligent about how they're framing this, corrective experiences and attachment and transference. And so wherever you learn that from, anonymous upper tier patron from Arizona, that's great. And if it's from me, or us, me and Bob, I feel proud of ourselves.
Right on.
But anyway, what should this person do, Bob?
Well, if that's your main goal, then you should find a male therapist.
Yeah. Because you're lightning rounding.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Am I supposed to say more? I don't really have more to say than that.
No, I think that's what I would say too.
Yeah.
But what I would say is it depends. And you're 34. There's a chance you might be in therapy for the rest of your life. That's okay. So it's okay to say, you know what? I know I need corrective experiences with men, but I want a break. So
well, that's different. Yeah, take a break.
Let me work with a woman for a year.
Right.
And you can get a lot of the corrective experiences. It's not like a corrective experience with a woman therapist would not address the trauma issues and the relational traumas that you went through.
Would it be an interesting place to talk about it though? Like,
right.
My male therapist, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And your female therapist could talk with you. You could talk together about engineering relationships outside of therapy that are with men that you can trust, that could be correct. Right. But yeah, if you really want to go to the heart of the matter, as Bob is saying, working with a male therapist, if you're up for it, would really accelerate in all likelihood the healing.
Yeah.
And I would give this email to a prospective therapist and say, what would you do? And really gauge their response. Because as I will often say, there's a good percentage of therapists that are dedicated to CBT or solution focus or something and will respond in a way, I hope, that would indicate that you should not be working with them.
They're not your cup.
Let's conclude there, Bob.
Hey, pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, well,
we got through 5 instead of 2.
Yeah. So
I have a hole in my sock.
You do?
Uh-huh.
Are you fiddling with it right now?
No, I just noticed it though.
Oh. Well, how do you feel about it?
I just think it's funny because last time I was here, that's what we talked about.
Yeah.
Foot prisons. Socks. You mean foot prisons? Somebody wrote that.
Socks were foot prisons? Oh, someone wrote that?
Yeah.
And as a comment?
Yeah.
Oh, funny. Because they agreed with me that they don't like to wear shoes?
I don't know about that. I don't remember that. They were just commenting on that. It was funny that you had, because you were talking about the fact that you don't mind taking your shoes off, but you have holes in your socks, and some of your clients have been bothered by.
Yeah. Well, since then, I've been real buttoned up, so to speak, with my socks so that I don't have holes in them.
I'm going to check now.
Okay. Bob's looking under the table.
That one? Yeah, you're good.
I'm good, yeah.
I got one square in my heel. I feel compelled to show you.
Oh, I see it. Well, you have 2 holes. There's one in the ball. There's one in the, or what do you call it? The
ball?
Up by your toes.
Toes? Yeah, I think that's the ball of the foot.
Yeah, there's another.
I got another hole there.
Yeah, a little. I think so, at least.
Oh, I do. Yeah, you're right.
You're falling apart at the seams.
I know, right? This one's starting to get a hole.
Yeah.
Lightning round.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.